Hello, everyone. Welcome to Story Sleep. My name is Mrs. Lumley, and I've lived in St. Mary Mead all my life, just a stone's throw from our dear Miss Marple. Oh, the things one sees, the things one hears in a quiet village like ours. Most of it, of course, is perfectly ordinary, the usual comings and goings, the small joys and minor squabbles that make up village life. But every now and then, something quite out of the usual happens. Something that sends a shiver down one's spine and sets the tongues wagging for months, if not years. Tonight, I want to tell the story of one such occurrence, a most perplexing affair that unfolded during the festive season, not far from our own little corner of the world. It involved a grand old house, a peculiar custom, and a truth that, well, you'll just have to hear for yourselves. It truly was a puzzle, one that only our Miss Marple, with her remarkable insight into human nature, could possibly unravel. Now let's begin with Chapter 1 of The Trial in the Christmas Castle. Chapter 1. The Annual Gala at Oak Haven Castle. The crisp December air of St. Mary Mead carried the scent of wood smoke and anticipation. Beyond the familiar lanes of the village, nestled amidst rolling, frost-kissed hills, stood Oak Haven Castle. It was not, in truth, a true medieval fortress, but a magnificent Victorian edifice, replete with turrets and gargoyles, built by an eccentric industrialist. Its current owner, Sir Alistair Finch, a man of inherited wealth and a jovial, if somewhat boisterous, disposition, had a particular fondness for the Yuletide season. Each year he transformed Oakhaven into a veritable wonderland, bestowing upon it the local moniker, the Christmas Castle. This year, the annual Christmas Eve Gala promised to be grander than ever. Invitations, embossed with a festive sprig of holly, had fluttered through the post to all corners of the county, and indeed to London itself. Miss Jane Marple, in her quiet cottage, had received one such invitation, a thoughtful gesture from Sir Alistair, who, despite his flamboyant nature, held a deep respect for the village's unofficial doyen. She often found such large gatherings rather tiring, the ceaseless chatter and the crush of unfamiliar faces, but she also knew that they provided an unparalleled opportunity for observation. Human nature, she often mused, revealed itself most candidly when draped in its finest silks and surrounded by festive cheer. She arrived, escorted by young Mr. Pringle from the local garage, who had a new, albeit slightly temperamental, motor car. The castle's driveway was already abristle with polished automobiles, and the sounds of laughter and music drifted from the illuminated windows. Inside, the great hall was a blaze of twinkling lights, towering fir trees laden with ornaments, and the rich aroma of roasted chestnuts and mulled wine. Sir Alistair, a robust man with a booming laugh and a perpetually red face, greeted his guests with an effusive warmth that seemed to fill the very cavernous space. Miss Marple found a quiet corner near a grand fireplace where she could observe the festive tableau. She recognized many faces: young Reginald Finch, Sir Alistair's nephew, a rather earnest but somewhat feckless young man, perpetually in search of a good investment; Miss Eleanor Thorne, Sir Alistair's grandniece, a striking woman with an intense gaze who worked in London as a fashion editor; and Mr. Davies, Sir Alistair's long-serving and impeccably discreet secretary, a man so unassuming he almost blended into the shadows. The evening progressed with the usual conviviality. Carols were sung, toasts were raised, and plates of delectable supper were consumed. Miss Marple, nibbling delicately on a mince pie, watched as Sir Alistair moved through the crowd, a benevolent monarch holding court. He seemed particularly animated when speaking with a striking, dark-haired woman she didn't recognize, draped in a gown of emerald green. Their conversation, though low, seemed punctuated by gestures of increasing animation from Sir Alistair. The woman, Miss Marple noted, maintained a cool, almost distant composure. Later, as the guests began to thin, Miss Marple observed a curious exchange. Sir Alistair, having perhaps imbibed a little too much sherry, approached his grandniece, Eleanor, with a jovial but firm tone. "Eleanor, my dear, you must truly reconsider this London folly. It is not suitable." Eleanor's jaw tightened, her eyes flashing. "Uncle, we have discussed this. My life is my own." Sir Alistair merely chuckled, patting her arm perhaps a little too forcefully. "Nonsense, child. You will do as I say in the end. Always have." The exchange was brief, easily missed amidst the lingering hum of the party, but Miss Marple's sharp ears had caught the undertone. It wasn't just a familial disagreement. There was a deeper tension, a sense of unresolved conflict. As Eleanor turned away, her elegant back ramrod straight, she cast a glance towards Mr. Davies, who was standing a little distance away, tidying some discarded programs. His expression, usually so placid, held a flicker of something Miss Marple couldn't quite place. Concern. Resignation? The party was finally drawing to a close. As Miss Marple prepared to depart, she overheard a fragment of conversation between two elderly ladies, guests from a neighboring estate. "Such a shame," one whispered. "Poor Mrs. Cartwright, all that fuss over the missing brooch. Sir Alistair can be so demanding when he doesn't get his way." The other nodded gravely. "Indeed, and that little incident with the miniature last year. He has a very particular idea of order, does our Sir Alistair." Miss Marple filed this away, a small, seemingly inconsequential detail. As Mr. Pringle helped her into the motor car, she glanced back at the grand, lit-up facade of Oakhaven Castle. It looked splendid, festive, but beneath the twinkling lights, she felt a subtle current of unease, a premonition that this Christmas season, despite all its outward cheer, held something more than just merriment for the occupants of the Christmas castle. Chapter 2. A Chill in the Air. The morning after the gala dawned gray and still. A thin, crystalline frost lay upon the village, encasing every twig and blade of grass in a delicate, ephemeral shimmer. For many, it was a morning of gentle recovery, of reminiscing about the previous night's festivities over tea and toast. But for those within Oakhaven Castle, the quiet peace of the Boxing Day morning was shattered by a discovery that sent a ripple of shock and fear through its ancient walls. Miss Marple, enjoying a leisurely breakfast of gruel and a particularly tart homemade marmalade, was interrupted by a frantic knocking at her cottage door. It was Mrs. Hemming, her usually unflappable daily help, looking decidedly pale and flustered. "Oh, Miss Marple! Such dreadful news! Mrs. Finch, Sir Alistair's housekeeper, just rang. Sir Alistair, he's passed away. In his study, this morning." Miss Marple's teacup, poised halfway to her lips, remained steady. "Indeed, Mrs. Hemming? How very sudden. Was he unwell?" Mrs. Hemming wrung her hands. They say it was his heart. Dr. Peterson is there now." But Mrs. Finch sounded quite beside herself, and she said it was all so strange. He was found slumped at his desk, and the room was, well, not quite right. Miss Marple considered this, her gentle blue eyes thoughtful. Sir Alistair had been a robust man, if prone to overindulgence. A sudden heart attack was plausible, especially after a night of such revelry. But Mrs. Finch's disquiet was a telling detail. Housekeepers, Miss Marple knew from long experience, possessed an unparalleled instinct for their domain. If something felt not quite right to Mrs. Finch, it very likely wasn't. Later that morning, Miss Marple received a call from Dr. Peterson himself. His voice, usually so steady and reassuring, held a note of professional guardedness. "Miss Marple, I thought you ought to know. It's Sir Alistair. A tragic end, I'm afraid. Found by Mr. Davies, the secretary, when he went to deliver the morning papers." "A heart attack, Dr. Peterson?" Miss Marple inquired gently. There was a slight hesitation. "That's the initial assessment, yes. He had a history of, shall we say, a robust constitution but a sedentary lifestyle. The strain of a large party, perhaps. However," Dr. Peterson paused again. "However, I have advised the police to be thorough. There are a few anomalies. Nothing concrete, you understand, but enough to warrant a closer look. Inspector Craddock from Scotland Yard is already on his way. A courtesy, you might say, given Sir Alistair's standing." "Anomalies, Doctor?" Miss Marple prompted softly. "Well, his desk was in a state, Miss Marple. Papers scattered, a lamp overturned. Not quite the tidy gentleman we knew. And the lock on his study door. It was rather stiff. Mr. Davies mentioned it had been working perfectly yesterday. A small thing, of course. But sometimes it's the small things, isn't it?" Dr. Peterson sighed. "I shall be quite frank with you, Miss Marple. His face, there was a certain expression, not one of peaceful passing, I'm afraid, but I am no expert in these matters of foul play, only in medicine. I've simply presented the facts as I see them to the authorities." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind already sifting through the doctor's carefully chosen words. A certain expression, not one of peaceful passing. These were not the pronouncements of a man entirely convinced by natural causes. The overturned lamp, the stiff lock, all minor discrepancies perhaps, but collectively they began to paint a picture. Sir Alister, a man of order, found in a disordered room. A perfectly functioning lock suddenly difficult. And the doctor's subtle doubt, unspoken yet powerfully conveyed. The news spread through St. Mary Mead like wildfire. Most villagers expressed shock and sorrow, but a few, like Mrs. Mellors from the post office, couldn't help but offer their own theories. Such a man as Sir Alister, with all his wealth, you see, Miss Marple, always attracts attention. And those family members of his, never quite satisfied, were they? Always after his money, I dare say. Miss Marple listened, absorbing the village's collective unconscious. She knew that rumor, while often inaccurate in its specifics, could sometimes capture the emotional truth of a situation. The anomalies Dr. Peterson mentioned, coupled with the village's ready suspicion of financial motives, suggested that this was indeed more than a simple heart attack. The Christmas castle, once a beacon of festive cheer, had suddenly become a place overshadowed by a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. The true nature of the tragedy began to solidify in Miss Marple's mind. The doctor's guarded words and Mrs. Finch's unease pointed towards a truth far darker than a natural passing. This was no mere coincidence. This was a puzzle. The first piece, the one that truly solidified her conviction, was Dr. Peterson's final, quiet remark. He was still holding a peculiar little silver box, clutched tight in his hand. An empty snuff box, it seemed. But why would he be holding that? A man dying of a heart attack, Miss Marple knew, would likely clutch his chest, not a decorative item. A small detail, perhaps, but to Miss Marple it spoke volumes, adding a chilling layer to the developing mystery. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. By mid-morning, the narrow lane leading to Oakhaven Castle was alive with official vehicles. A black police car, a forensic van, and even a discreet vehicle from Scotland Yard, bearing the formidable Inspector Craddock, stood testament to the fact that Dr. Peterson's subtle doubts had been taken seriously. The news, now undeniably official, that Sir Alister Finch's death was being treated as suspicious, swept through St. Mary Mead, igniting a flurry of speculation and hushed conversations. Miss Marple, ever observant, saw the ripple effect of this declaration. Village gossip, previously a gentle stream, now swelled into a torrent, each drop carrying a fragment of rumor or a half-formed theory. But it was within the castle walls that the storm truly began to gather. The remaining guests, many of whom had stayed overnight, were now effectively confined, transformed from jovial partygoers into potential witnesses, or worse, suspects. Inspector Craddock, a man Miss Marple had encountered on previous equally perplexing occasions, was a formidable presence. Tall, with keen analytical eyes, he possessed a mind that respected facts and procedures, yet had learned, sometimes grudgingly, to listen to Miss Marple's seemingly tangential observations. He established his temporary headquarters in Sir Alister's grand dining room, where the remnants of the Christmas Eve feast seemed ironically out of place amidst the grim faces. Interviews began. Mrs. Finch, the distraught housekeeper, recounted the discovery. Her voice trembling, Mr. Davies, the quiet secretary, gave a precise, if somewhat detached, account of finding his employer. He confirmed the stiff lock, the overturned lamp, and the scattered papers, adding that Sir Alister was indeed clutching a small, ornate silver snuff-box. Then came the family. Reginald Finch, the nephew, appeared genuinely shocked and distressed. He spoke of his uncle with affection, though Miss Marple noted a slight undertone of frustration in his voice when discussing Sir Alister's stubbornness regarding certain financial ventures. Eleanor Thorne, the grand-niece, was composed, almost unnervingly so. She reiterated her disagreement with Sir Alister over her career choices, but denied any deeper animosity, portraying their exchange as a typical family squabble. Inspector Craddock, though polite, allowed his sharp gaze to linger on both of them, sensing the subtle undercurrents. He was a professional, trained to spot the cracks in a carefully constructed facade. Miss Marple, meanwhile, mentally sorted through her own observations from the previous evening. Reginald's perpetually strained finances, Eleanor's cool defiance, the mysterious emerald-clad woman, and the general air of Sir Alister's proprietorial nature. As Craddock moved on to interview other guests and staff, Miss Marple, permitted to remain largely unmolested in her quiet corner, pieced together more fragments. She learned that the mysterious emerald woman was a Mrs. Celia Drummond, a recently widowed socialite whom Sir Alister had been openly courting. She had been one of the last to see him alive, having a private conversation with him in his study shortly before the party concluded. Craddock's initial line of questioning naturally focused on motive: money, inheritance, personal grudges. Sir Alister, a wealthy bachelor, had no direct heirs apart from his nephew and grandniece. His will, it was widely known, had been the subject of frequent amendments. This made Reginald and Eleanor prime suspects. Mr. Davies, the secretary, while outwardly above reproach, was privy to all of Sir Alister's financial dealings and private affairs, and his quiet competence could, Miss Marple mused, conceal much. It was during a break in the formal interviews, as the forensics team moved discreetly about the study, that Craddock approached Miss Marple. "Your thoughts, Miss Marple? Any village parallels come to mind?" he asked, a faint, almost imperceptible wryness in his tone. He knew better than to dismiss her old lady's comparisons. Miss Marple folded her hands. "Well, Inspector, it reminds me a little of old Mr. Henderson's prize-winning roses. So perfectly cultivated, so admired, but beneath the surface there was always a struggle for dominance, for the richest soil, for the brightest sun. And sometimes one would discover a root secretly strangling another." She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "And I do recall Sir Alister being particularly proud of his miniature collection, especially the rare one, the Dancing Cavalier. Such a unique piece. I trust it is quite safe?" Craddock's expression changed, a flicker of surprise and then a sharp professional intensity. "The miniature collection?" "Yes, it was in a display cabinet in the study. Let me just confirm that." He excused himself abruptly, heading directly towards the study where a uniformed officer was still standing guard. A few minutes later, Craddock reappeared, his face now grim. He walked directly to Miss Marple, his usual composure slightly ruffled. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low and tight, "the Dancing Cavalier miniature is missing. It's a priceless antique, Sir Alister's most cherished possession. It's not in the display cabinet. And the cabinet was locked from the outside." He looked at her, his eyes narrowed. This was not just a simple heart attack, was it? We're dealing with a murder, and possibly a theft. The revelation hung in the air, a chilling confirmation of the gathering storm. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Drawing Room. The disappearance of the Dancing Cavalier miniature transformed the atmosphere within Oakhaven Castle from one of uneasy suspicion to palpable dread. The local constabulary, reinforced by Craddock's Scotland Yard contingent, now operated with an intensified grimness. Every remaining guest, every member of staff, was now under a microscopic scrutiny that allowed no detail, no utterance, to pass unheeded. The drawing room, once a cheerful hub of conversation, became a purgatory of forced proximity and suppressed tension as the occupants awaited their next round of questioning. Miss Marple, ensconced in her armchair by the crackling fire, observed the human drama unfolding. Tensions, previously latent, now simmered visibly beneath the polite surface. The strained smiles, the overly careful movements, the abrupt cessation of conversation when a police officer passed, all spoke volumes. It was, she mused, rather like a particularly unpleasant tea party, where everyone suspected everyone else of having taken the last scone. Reginald Finch, the nephew, had shed his initial veneer of shock. He paced fretfully, occasionally running a hand through his already disheveled hair. Miss Eleanor Thorne, conversely, seemed to have retreated further into herself. her elegant posture rigid, her gaze fixed on some distant point, though Miss Marple noted her fingers occasionally plucked nervously at a loose thread on her sleeve. Mrs. Celia Drummond, the emerald-clad socialite, now looked less alluring and more distraught, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, though her tears seemed more of indignation than true grief. Miss Marple also paid close attention to the background hum of the household staff. Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, moved with a rigid efficiency, her eyes wide and watchful. The other maids and footmen went about their duties with an almost exaggerated quietness, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Inspector Craddock, after securing the study and initiating a thorough search of the castle, returned to the drawing-room. He addressed the remaining company with a grave formality. As you are all aware, Sir Alister's death is now officially a murder investigation. Furthermore, a valuable antique miniature, the Dancing Cavalier, is missing from his study. This complicates matters significantly. We are treating this as a possible robbery that escalated into murder. Everyone will remain here for the foreseeable future. We appreciate your cooperation." A collective gasp, then a flurry of murmured questions was quickly suppressed by Craddock's stern gaze. He was a master of controlled intimidation. Miss Marple, however, found herself more interested in the subtle shifts in the village whispers that inevitably found their way even into the castle's heavily guarded environs. A young maid, Sarah, helping to clear some tea things, spoke to another in hushed tones, loud enough for Miss Marple to catch. "Did you hear? Old Mr. Henderson at the Red Lion said young Mr. Reginald was seen last week, looking terribly down on his luck. Said he owed money to some rather unsavory types in London, and Sir Alister had threatened to cut him off entirely if he didn't sort himself out." This snippet, Miss Marple knew, was precisely the sort of detail that might be dismissed by the police as mere gossip. But to her, it was a vital piece of the human puzzle. Reginald, always struggling financially, now seemingly desperate. A direct threat from his wealthy uncle. This provided a powerful, undeniable motive. Greed, after all, was one of the most ancient and potent of human failings. She also recalled the previous night's exchange between Sir Alister and Eleanor, his pronouncement that, "You will do as I say, in the end." What did that imply beyond her career? Was there a deeper control, perhaps over Eleanor's inheritance, or even a prospective marriage? Sir Alister, Miss Marple reflected, was known for his love of orchestrating people's lives, a trait he shared with the late Mrs. Abernathy, who had often left her relatives in a state of similar financial suspense. As the afternoon wore on and the light began to fade, casting long shadows across the drawing-room, Miss Marple observed Reginald Finch engaging in a heated, hushed conversation with Mr. Davies. Their voices were too low to discern words, but Reginald's gestures were agitated, while Mr. Davies remained impassive, almost wooden. Whatever they were discussing, it clearly involved a degree of urgency and secrecy. Later, Inspector Craddock returned looking more thoughtful than usual. He made eye contact with Miss Marple. "We've just had a report, Miss Marple. Confirmed from London sources. Mr. Reginald Finch has indeed been accumulating substantial debts over the past year. Gambling, mostly, and quite serious ones at that. Sir Alister was apparently furious about it, and had recently threatened to disinherit him if he didn't clean up his act." The inspector's voice was low, but the implication was clear. Reginald had a very strong motive indeed. The whispers in the drawing-room had been confirmed as cold, hard fact, pulling Reginald deeper into the shadow of suspicion. Chapter 5. The Peculiar Footman. The revelation of Reginald Finch's substantial debts cast a long, dark shadow over the anxious gathering at Oakhaven Castle. Inspector Craddock, with his methodical approach, now focused a significant portion of his attention on the nephew, meticulously checking alibis and scrutinizing his every utterance. The other suspects, though still confined, seemed to recede slightly from the immediate glare of official suspicion, breathing a small collective sigh of relief. But Miss Marple's intuition rarely followed the most obvious path. While Reginald's motive was compelling, she had learned over the years that the most blatant reason was often a convenient misdirection. Her gaze, seemingly mild, drifted past the agitated nephew, past the cool grandniece and past the distraught socialite. Instead, it settled on the periphery of the household, specifically on the staff. The staff, though well-trained and efficient, moved with an unusual nervousness. Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, was becoming increasingly harried, her authority visibly challenged by the police presence. The younger maids, usually prone to giggles, now whispered in hushed tones, their eyes wide with morbid fascination and fear. Among them, one figure particularly caught Miss Marple's attention. Thomas, a new footman who had only been employed for a few weeks prior to the Christmas festivities. He was a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, with sharp features and an almost unnervingly quiet demeanor. Unlike the other staff who occasionally exchanged nervous glances or snippets of gossip, Thomas moved with a singular focus, his eyes rarely meeting anyone's. He seemed to embody a silent efficiency that bordered on secretiveness. Miss Marple observed him over the course of the day. He served tea with perfect decorum, cleared plates without a sound, and answered any direct questions with polite, concise replies. Yet there was an underlying tension in his shoulders, a way he held his chin a little too high, that suggested a man perpetually on guard. It reminded Miss Marple of a young gardener she once knew, who had a secret passion for card games and was always terrified of being discovered by his straight-laced employer. She decided to make a subtle inquiry. During a quiet moment when Thomas was arranging some flowers, Miss Marple approached him. "Those carnations are lovely, Thomas," she commented, her voice gentle. "Such a vibrant red. You're new to Oakhaven, aren't you? Sir Alistair always liked to have a fresh face about the place." Thomas turned, his eyes briefly meeting hers, and in that fleeting moment, Miss Marple detected a flash of something akin to apprehension, quickly masked. "Yes, ma'am. Just a few weeks. Came highly recommended, I was." His voice was smooth, almost too smooth. "Indeed." Miss Marple smiled benignly. "And where did you work before, if you don't mind an old woman's curiosity?" He hesitated, a fraction of a second too long. "In London, ma'am, a private household. They relocated abroad, unfortunately." "Oh, what a shame," Miss Marple murmured. "Moving abroad can be quite disruptive. So many changes. One hopes the references were quite impeccable." Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, ma'am." "Perfectly so." He then excused himself abruptly, claiming a task in the kitchen. Miss Marple watched him go, her brow slightly furrowed. His composure, usually so perfect, had cracked ever so slightly under her gentle prodding. His answers were rehearsed, his reluctance to elaborate telling. A highly recommended footman would usually be proud to speak of a former, respectable employer. His evasiveness about his previous position was a small, unsettling detail. Later, as Inspector Craddock continued his rounds, Miss Marple approached him, ostensibly to ask for an update on the general state of affairs. She then, as if an afterthought, mentioned Thomas. Such a quiet young man, that footman. Efficient, but rather new, isn't he? One wonders where Sir Alistair found him. Craddock, though focused on Reginald, made a mental note. "We're checking all the staff, Miss Marple, not to worry. References and background. Routine." That evening, as the castle remained under lockdown, Miss Marple received an unexpected, whispered visit from Mrs. Finch. The housekeeper, her face etched with worry, sought Miss Marple's counsel. "Miss Marple," she began, her voice barely audible, "I'm in such a state. It's about Thomas. I hired him myself, from an agency in London. Sir Alistair was always particular about references, but he'd gone off for a few days, and with the Christmas rush, I was desperate. The agency assured me he was excellent." "And has he been?" Miss Marple asked. "Oh yes, perfectly so. Almost too perfect, but I've just remembered something dreadful. A few years ago, there was a terrible scandal involving a young footman at the Earl of Ashworth's estate. A valuable jewel went missing, and the footman disappeared without a trace. The description, it was rather vague in the papers, but the name, Thomas. And the timing, it seems to match." Mrs. Finch wrung her hands. "I never put it together until now, with all this talk of missing miniatures. What if this Thomas is that? Thomas?" The revelation hit Miss Marple with the force of a well-aimed clue. The footman's guardedness, his evasiveness, his almost unnatural quietness, it all suddenly made chilling sense. Thomas wasn't just nervous. He was hiding a past, a very specific and incriminating past. The connection to a previous jewel theft, particularly now that the dancing cavalier was missing, was too striking to be a coincidence. The peculiar footman, Miss Marple realized, might not be a peripheral figure after all, but a central and very dangerous piece of the puzzle. Chapter 6. A Hidden Passage. The news of Thomas, the footman, and his potentially scandalous past was a significant development. Inspector Craddock, once apprised of Mrs. Finch's belated recollection, immediately shifted his focus, directing a discreet but thorough investigation into the young man's background. Thomas, now aware of the heightened scrutiny, grew even more withdrawn, his silence becoming less of a trait and more of a shield. Miss Marple, however, found her thoughts drifting in a slightly different direction. The missing miniature and the footman's past suggested a clear motive for theft and, by extension, murder. But something still felt incomplete. The study, she recalled, had been in a state of disarray, an overturned lamp, scattered papers. And the lock, according to Mr. Davies and Dr. Peterson, had been stiff, as if recently tampered with or forced. She remembered a conversation she'd had years ago with old Mrs. Weatherby, a distant relative of the original Oakhaven industrialist, who had often recounted tales of the castle's peculiarities. Mrs. Weatherby, a woman prone to exaggeration but occasionally blessed with accurate recollections, had spoken of secret ways and hidden doors built by the eccentric first owner. He was a tinker, that one. She'd chuckled, loved his little passages and bolt holes as if he were expecting a siege, even in the middle of a perfectly peaceful English countryside. Miss Marple, during her visit to the gala, had also noticed a rather unusually placed, heavy tapestry on the wall of the main corridor, not far from the study. It depicted a somewhat dreary hunting scene, rather out of character with Sir Alister's generally lighter tastes in decor. It had seemed to conceal nothing, but her memory of Mrs. Weatherby's stories piqued her curiosity. Later that afternoon, while the police were preoccupied with questioning Thomas and securing various items for forensic analysis, Miss Marple decided to take a quiet stroll. Under the guise of admiring the castle's architectural details, she made her way towards the corridor where she'd noted the tapestry. The area was less frequented by the police, as it was considered a minor thoroughfare. The tapestry hung heavy and still. Miss Marple approached it, her movements slow and deliberate as if merely appreciating the artistry. She gently ran her hand along the edge, feeling for any irregularities in the plasterwork beneath. Nothing obvious. But then, as her fingers moved lower towards the baseboard, she felt a slight indentation, a faint line where the wall didn't quite meet perfectly. It was almost imperceptible, concealed by years of paint and wallpaper, but it was there. She pressed lightly, tentatively, where the indentation was deepest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a faint, almost inaudible click, a small section of the wall, concealed by the tapestry, moved inwards, revealing a narrow, dusty gap. It was not a grand, imposing secret passage, but a cramped, almost claustrophobic aperture, leading into darkness. The air within was stale, carrying the faint scent of old stone and disuse. Miss Marple peered into the gloom, her heart beating a little faster. This was exactly the sort of thing Mrs. Weatherby had described. A bolt hole, perhaps used by servants in a bygone era or for clandestine meetings. The passage, Miss Marple estimated, would likely lead either to another part of the castle's interior or, more intriguingly, to an exterior access point, perhaps even the gardens. She could not, of course, venture into the passage herself. It was far too dark and possibly unstable. But the discovery was immensely significant. If this passage existed and was accessible from the study, it would entirely undermine the police's assumption that the study had been a sealed room, entered only through the main door. It meant a killer could have entered and exited unseen, perhaps bypassing the main hall entirely and thus escaping immediate detection. Carefully, she pushed the panel back into place. It clicked shut, once again perfectly concealed. She straightened her dress and continued her quiet walk, as if nothing untoward had happened. The knowledge, however, hummed within her. This hidden passage offered an entirely new dimension to the crime. It meant the murderer did not necessarily have to be someone who had been present in the main part of the castle, or even an invited guest. It opened the possibility of an outsider, or someone who simply wished to avoid detection by using an alternative route. Later, she found a moment to speak to Inspector Craddock. "Inspector," she began, her voice calm, "I was just recalling something Mrs. Weatherby used to say about Oakhaven Castle. She always insisted there were secret passages. Silly old thing, one might think, but sometimes there's a grain of truth in such stories, isn't there?" Craddock raised an eyebrow, accustomed to Miss Marple's circuitous approach. "Secret passages, Miss Marple? A little fanciful for a modern murder investigation, perhaps?" "Perhaps," she conceded with a faint smile. "But then a locked room isn't quite so locked if there's another way in, is it? And if one were to think about the study, I believe there's a tapestry in the corridor just outside it, a rather somber hunting scene that seems rather out of place." Craddock's eyes narrowed. He was a man of logic, but he had learned to trust Miss Marple's instinct, however unconventional. He merely nodded, a flicker of professional curiosity in his gaze. Miss Marple knew he would investigate. Her discovery of the hidden passage completely altered the dynamics of the crime, suggesting that the killer might have gained entry or made an escape route far more complex than a simple walk through the main doors. It introduced a new element of cunning and forethought, adding another layer to the already intricate puzzle of Sir Alister's murder. Chapter 7. The Unsent Letter. The existence of a potential hidden passage near Sir Alister's study was a development that Inspector Craddock could not ignore. While his men meticulously re-examined the area surrounding the tapestry Miss Marple had indicated, the investigation continued its broader scope, focusing on the tangled relationships within Oakhaven Castle. Miss Marple, ever watchful, observed the grandniece Eleanor Thorne. Her composure, initially a source of suspicion for its very perfection, now seemed to be fraying at the edges. She spent long hours in her room, emerging only for meals or when summoned by the police. There was a pallor to her skin, and her eyes, though still intense, held a haunted quality. Miss Marple recalled the heated exchange between Eleanor and Sir Alister on Christmas Eve, not just about her London career, but a deeper, possessive tone in Sir Alister's voice. Eleanor was a woman of intelligence and independence, qualities that Sir Alister, for all his joviality, often seemed to resent in women he considered under his care. He had, Miss Marple recalled from village gossip, been similarly overbearing with his late sister, Eleanor's mother, controlling her finances and even her choice of husband to some extent. It seemed a pattern. A breakthrough, albeit an unexpected one, came during a routine search of the private quarters. A junior constable, tasked with inventorying Eleanor's belongings, discovered a letter tucked away in a locked desk drawer. It was unsent, crumpled as if in frustration, and addressed to a prominent firm of London solicitors. The constable, noting its unusual nature, immediately brought it to Inspector Craddock's attention. Craddock, his brow furrowed, read the letter aloud in the drawing-room, where the remaining guests were once again gathered. Eleanor, who had been called down, stood rigidly, her face draining of color as Craddock's voice filled the room. The letter, dated just 3 days before the gala, was from Eleanor to Messrs. Blackwood and Sons, solicitors. It stated, in firm and unequivocal terms, her urgent desire to discuss her legal options regarding her trust fund, and, more specifically, her uncle Sir Alister Finch's increasingly restrictive control over her financial affairs. The crucial lines, which Craddock read with deliberate emphasis, were, "My uncle has become almost tyrannical in his insistence that I abandon my career in London and marry a man of his choosing. A Mr. Jeremy Ponsonby, whom I find utterly insufferable. He has threatened to alter his will to my extreme disadvantage should I refuse. I understand he has already initiated contact with his own solicitors to this effect. I fear for my future independence, and I believe he may be preparing to act upon these threats within the coming days." A stunned silence fell over the drawing-room. Reginald Finch stared at his grandniece, his own financial woes momentarily forgotten in the face of this new revelation. Mrs. Celia Drummond's eyes widened with a sudden, dawning comprehension. Even Mr. Davies, the unflappable secretary, seemed to flinch, though he quickly regained his composure. Eleanor, her initial shock now replaced by a fierce resentment, spoke, her voice surprisingly steady despite her pale face. "It's true. He was trying to control every aspect of my life. He saw my career as a folly, and Mr. Ponsonby as a suitable catch to secure my future, as he put it. But I wanted my own life. I wouldn't be blackmailed." "So you admit he was threatening to disinherit you, Miss Thorne?" Craddock pressed. "Not disinherit entirely, but to restrict my access to my inheritance significantly. To force my hand," she clarified, her chin held high. "He was moving to amend his will this very week. I wrote that letter in desperation, but I never sent it. I was still hoping to reason with him." Craddock nodded slowly, taking it all in. Here was another powerful motive, one of profound personal liberty and financial leverage. Sir Alistair was not merely a benevolent host, he was a manipulator, holding the reins of his family's futures. Both Reginald and Eleanor had been facing the stark reality of being cut off or severely constrained by Sir Alistair's will. Miss Marple listened, her mind making connections. Sir Alistair's controlling nature, his particular idea of order, as the village ladies had remarked, was not just about his collections, but about his family's lives. He was, she thought, rather like old Mrs. Grinstead, who liked to arrange everyone else's flowers to her own exacting specifications, never mind if they preferred them wilder. But Mrs. Grinstead never threatened disinheritance. The unsent letter provided a stark, undeniable motive for Eleanor, placing her squarely alongside Reginald in the list of primary suspects. It revealed Sir Alistair as a man who wielded his wealth as a weapon of control, a fact that could easily drive someone to desperate measures. The castle, Miss Marple reflected, felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. The motive was clear, but the method, particularly with the hidden passage now in play, remained elusive. The most unsettling aspect, however, was the chilling implication that Sir Alistair's death had come at precisely the moment he was poised to make drastic changes to his will, a final, fateful act that could dramatically alter the lives of those around him. Chapter 8. The Gardener's Tale. With the motives of both Reginald Finch and Eleanor Thorne now starkly evident, Inspector Craddock divided his team. Some continued to investigate the hidden passage, while others delved deeper into the financial affairs of the family and confirmed Sir Alistair's recent interactions with his solicitors. The atmosphere in Oakhaven Castle remained oppressive, the forced conviviality of the gala a distant, ironic memory. Miss Marple, meanwhile, found herself drawn to the quieter, often overlooked members of the household. She had a profound respect for those who work the land and maintained the unseen rhythms of a large estate. They often saw and heard things that others, wrapped in their own concerns, missed entirely. The head gardener, Mr. Hopkins, was one such man. A taciturn individual with gnarled hands and eyes that missed nothing, he had served Sir Alistair for over 30 years. She found Mr. Hopkins in the conservatory, tending to some fragile orchids, his movements precise and gentle. The air was warm and humid, a stark contrast to the frosty world outside. "Good morning, Mr. Hopkins," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "Those are beautiful, truly. Sir Alistair was always so proud of his orchids." Mr. Hopkins grunted, a sound that served as an acknowledgment. "He was, ma'am. Demanding, too, about them. Every petal perfect. A bit like everything else for him." Miss Marple smiled faintly. Indeed, he certainly had an eye for order. "It must have been quite a bustling affair on Christmas Eve with all those guests. Did you manage to enjoy any of the festivities?" Mr. Hopkins paused, straightening up and wiping his hands on a rag. "No, ma'am. I had my own work. Late, too. Sir Alistair insisted on a fresh batch of holly and ivy for the grand staircase, even though we'd already done it. Said the previous arrangement lacked vigor. Had me out in the gardens till nearly 9 o'clock, clipping and foraging." 9 o'clock, Miss Marple repeated thoughtfully. The main party would have been well underway then. That's very late indeed for such a task. A cold night for it, too. Aye, freezing, but he was particular. And then, Mr. Hopkins continued, his gaze drifting towards the conservatory's glass roof. I was just finishing up, near the north wing, by the study window actually. I was putting away my tools in the shed, and the wind was blowing a bit, and I noticed a smell. A peculiar smell, not like anything from the garden. Miss Marple's attention sharpened. A smell, Mr. Hopkins? What kind of smell? He scratched his chin, searching for the right words. Sharp-like. Not pleasant. A bit metallic. And sweet at the same time. Not a flower, not the compost. Nothing I recognized. Faint it was, but distinct. Blew in from near the study, it seemed. A strange thing to notice at that hour, and on a frosty night, when most smells are dulled. And you're certain it came from near the study window? Miss Marple pressed. Aye, blew right past me. I didn't think much of it at the time, just thought some newfangled cleaning product, perhaps. But now with all this, he gestured vaguely towards the main part of the castle. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. A faint, unusual scent near the study window, late on Christmas Eve. The study window. The hidden passage. Could they be connected? What sort of substance would produce such an odor? Metallic and sweet. It sounded rather like some chemical, perhaps. Something used in an unexpected way. She knew that the police, during their initial examination, would have looked for more obvious things. Footprints, forced entry. But a faint, fleeting scent, detectable only by a seasoned outdoorsman like Mr. Hopkins, might easily have been overlooked, especially indoors amidst the lingering smells of the party. Later, she discreetly shared Mr. Hopkins' observation with Inspector Craddock, who was reviewing some notes. Inspector Mr. Hopkins, the gardener, mentioned a peculiar scent near the study window on Christmas Eve. Metallic and sweet, he said. Rather unusual. Craddock frowned. A scent? Faint? It's hardly concrete evidence, Miss Marple. No, Inspector, perhaps not in isolation, but consider it alongside the stiff lock, the overturned lamp, the hidden passage. And now, this scent from outside, it paints a picture, doesn't it, of someone perhaps approaching the study from an unconventional route, and perhaps using something specific to their purpose. Miss Marple knew the inspector would dispatch someone to check the area again, though a scent would likely have dissipated by now. The important thing was the implication. The gardener's tale was more than just a passing observation. It was a critical, albeit subtle, clue. It hinted at a method of murder that was neither a simple attack nor a straightforward poisoning in a drink. It suggested a carefully planned approach, possibly involving a unique substance, delivered through a less obvious means. The faint, unusual smell from outside the study window, detected by a man whose life was spent discerning the nuances of nature, shifted the focus of the investigation towards a more precise and intricate form of foul play. The Christmas castle was revealing its secrets, not through grand gestures, but through quiet, observant eyes and subtle whispers carried on the winter air. Chapter 9. A Question of Time. The combined weight of the hidden passage, Thomas's dubious past, and the gardener's peculiar scent report significantly broadened Inspector Craddock's investigation. The initial focus on immediate family members with clear financial motives now had to accommodate a more intricate scenario, potentially involving an external party or a more sophisticated method. The pressure mounted, as the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, usually a haven of predictable rhythms, became a crucible of speculation and mounting fear. Miss Marple, observing the flurry of police activity, understood that the precise timing of Sir Alister's death was now paramount. The events of Christmas Eve, particularly the hours leading up to and immediately following the discovery of the body, needed to be meticulously re-examined. Everyone's movements, every conversation, every detail, however trivial, might hold the key. Craddock, with his usual thoroughness, began a second round of interviews, pressing for precise timings. Mr. Davies, the secretary, reiterated his account of finding Sir Alister just after 8 a.m. on Boxing Day. He stated that he had last seen Sir Alister alive when he delivered some urgent papers to his study at around 11:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve, just before the last guests were leaving. Sir Alister had been alone. Reginald Finch claimed to have retired to his room shortly after midnight, after a final, rather heated, discussion with his uncle about his debts. Eleanor Thorne stated she went to her room around the same time, feeling unwell after their disagreement. Mrs. Celia Drummond, the socialite, maintained she had left the study after a brief, private conversation with Sir Alistair at approximately 11:15 p.m., then departed the castle with her driver around 11:45 p.m. The various accounts, while largely consistent, created a window of time, roughly between 11:30 p.m. and the discovery of the body, during which the crime could have occurred. However, a crucial piece of information emerged during Craddock's re-interview of Mr. Davies. "Mr. Davies," Craddock began, "you mentioned the state of the study, the overturned lamp, the scattered papers, and Sir Alistair was found slumped at his desk. Did you notice anything about the clock?" Mr. Davies, ever precise, adjusted his spectacles. "The grandfather clock in the corner?" "Yes, Inspector. It was chiming as I entered the room. Precisely 8 a.m. He paused. "Though, now that you mention it, Sir Alistair was quite fastidious about his clocks. He kept that particular one, an heirloom set to be exactly right with Greenwich Mean Time. But I noticed this morning, after the discovery, that it was running fast. By precisely 15 minutes, in fact." Craddock's pen hovered over his notepad. "15 minutes fast? Are you certain, Mr. Davies?" "Absolutely, Inspector. I checked my own watch against it, and I distinctly remember Sir Alistair setting it himself only last week, bemoaning how inaccurate most timepieces were. He made a point of it being exact." Miss Marple, listening from her usual vantage point, felt a jolt of recognition. A clock running fast by a specific margin was rarely an accident in such a setting. It was a detail too precise to be coincidental. It reminded her of the time old Mrs. Pargeter had deliberately set her kitchen clock ahead to make her shiftless nephew think he was late for work, hoping to spur him into action. But this was far more sinister. If the clock was indeed set fast by 15 minutes, it meant that any witness who had relied on that clock for their timings might have unwittingly provided an inaccurate alibi. A person claiming to have left the study at 11:15 p.m. by the study clock, for instance, would in reality have left at 11:00 p.m. A person retiring to their room at midnight by the study clock would have retired at 11:45 p.m. This manipulation of time could subtly shift the window of opportunity for the murder, implicating or exonerating individuals in unexpected ways. Craddock, too, saw the significance. "Thank you, Mr. Davies. This is very important." He turned to his sergeant. "Get the forensics team back into the study. Check the mechanism of that clock. See if it was tampered with, or if it simply developed a fault." The discovery of the altered clock immediately called into question the integrity of everyone's alibis. If the killer had manipulated the clock, they had clearly planned to obscure the precise time of death, creating confusion and misdirection. It suggested a cunning, calculating mind, someone who understood the importance of details and how they could be warped. The window of opportunity for the murder now stretched, elastic and uncertain, making every alibi suspect. The question of time, Miss Marple realized, was not merely about when Sir Alistair died, but about how expertly the killer had tried to hide it. Chapter 10. The Missing Key. The mystery of the fast-running clock at Oakhaven Castle added a layer of profound uncertainty to the established timeline of Sir Alistair's death. Inspector Craddock's team meticulously re-interviewed everyone, pushing for their memory of the precise hour and cross-referencing their alibis against this new, disorienting factor. The air in the castle was thick with suspicion, as each person found their own memory, and thus their innocence, called into question. Miss Marple, as ever, allowed her mind to wander through the seemingly inconsequential details, drawing connections from her vast tapestry of village life. The clock, the hidden passage, the peculiar smell, the financial motives, they were all threads, waiting to be woven into a coherent pattern. She was particularly interested in the missing miniature, the dancing cavalier, which, despite extensive searching, had not been found. Its absence seemed central, not just as a motive for theft, but perhaps as a deliberate symbolic act. During this period of intense re-examination, a new point of contention arose, focusing on a small, locked cabinet within Sir Alistair's study. This cabinet, Mr. Davies had previously explained, contained important personal documents, confidential financial papers, and indeed, the original official copy of Sir Alister's last will and testament. It was a heavy, old-fashioned cabinet made of dark oak, with a single, intricately designed lock. Inspector Craddock asked Mr. Davies about the key to this cabinet. "Mr. Davies, where is the key to this cabinet? Was Sir Alister in the habit of keeping it on his person?" Mr. Davies adjusted his spectacles again, a nervous habit. "Indeed, Inspector. He was extremely particular about that key. He never let it out of his sight. He would usually keep it on a small silver chain in his waistcoat pocket, or, if he was in the study for any length of time, on a small hook discreetly placed on the underside of his desk." "And was it there when you found him?" Craddock asked, his voice sharp. "No, Inspector. It was not. I looked, of course, after everything. I know how important those documents were to him." Mr. Davies hesitated, his gaze briefly flickering towards Reginald and Eleanor, who were now observing the conversation with renewed interest. "In fact, when I took the urgent papers to him at 11:30 on Christmas Eve, I distinctly remember him unlocking the cabinet to retrieve a specific document, a letter from his solicitors regarding the finalization of the new will. He then relocked it and put the key back on the hook. I saw him do it. The revelation was profound. The key, usually guarded so meticulously, was now missing, and Mr. Davies's testimony confirmed that Sir Alister had been specifically dealing with his will just hours before his death, likely the very will that would disinherit Eleanor or further constrain Reginald. This provided a potent new layer to the motives. It suggested that someone might have wanted not only to stop Sir Alister from changing his will, but also to access or perhaps even destroy the existing one, or other sensitive documents contained within the cabinet. Craddock pressed Mr. Davies. "Are you certain he put the key back on the hook, Mr. Davies? Could he have simply put it in his pocket?" "I am certain, Inspector. He had a precise ritual, always the hook when he was in the study. He said it prevented him from misplacing it amongst his papers." Mr. Davies looked genuinely distressed. "The key is simply gone." The implications were stark. The killer had not merely murdered Sir Alister, they had also taken his key. This suggested a motive beyond simply silencing him. It hinted at an intention to tamper with the contents of the cabinet, perhaps to alter the course of inheritance, or to conceal another, darker secret. Miss Marple, however, found herself thinking not just about the missing key, but about the manner of its disappearance. Sir Alister, by all accounts, was a man of strict habits and order. For him to misplace such a crucial item seemed out of character. For someone to take it after his death implied a very specific purpose. She remembered Mrs. Long, whose husband had once lost the key to their gardening shed, only for it to turn up months later in the pocket of his favorite tweed jacket, just when a neighbor had been accused of borrowing his prize-winning spade. Sometimes, Miss Marple reflected, the missing item was less about its inherent value and more about its strategic absence. The missing key was not merely a detail. It was a powerful indicator of the killer's intent. It pointed towards a calculated motive, a deliberate act to control information or resources after Sir Alister's death. This was no impulsive crime, but a carefully orchestrated plan, now rendered more complex by the interplay of a hidden passage, a doctored clock, and a vanished miniature. The Christmas castle was revealing its layers, each new clue deepening the labyrinthine mystery and pulling the truth further out of reach. Chapter 11. The Puzzle Unveiled. The weight of the investigation, the constant scrutiny, and the chilling array of clues, the hidden passage, the peculiar scent, the altered clock, the missing miniature, and now the vanished cabinet key had pushed Oakhaven Castle to its breaking point. Inspector Craddock, though thorough, found himself grappling with a multitude of conflicting possibilities, each thread leading to a different suspect. Reginald's debts, Eleanor's threatened inheritance, Thomas's criminal past, all presented compelling motives. Yet no single piece of evidence definitively tied any one person to the act. It was then that Miss Marple, after days of quiet observation and meticulous mental cataloging, decided it was time. She requested a gathering, not of suspects in a police lineup, but of all those involved in the drawing room where the drama had largely unfolded. Craddock, who had come to respect her uncanny insights, reluctantly agreed, arranging for everyone: Reginald, Eleanor, Mr. Davies, Mrs. Celia Drummond, and even a nervous Thomas to be present. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows. The faces gathered were a tableau of anxiety, suspicion, and veiled apprehension. Miss Marple, seated calmly, her knitting forgotten in her lap, began to speak, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the heavy silence. "You know," she began, her gaze sweeping over each person, "it reminds me a little of Mrs. Perkins's prize-winning quilt. Such beautiful squares, each meticulously stitched, but if one thread is pulled, the whole pattern can unravel, revealing a very different picture indeed." She started with the apparent heart attack, gently pointing out Dr. Peterson's subtle doubts, the not quite right feeling of Mrs. Finch. Then she addressed the primary suspects. "We have heard of Mr. Reginald's unfortunate debts, and Sir Alister's intention to disinherit him. A clear motive. And Miss Eleanor, your struggle for independence, and Sir Alister's threat to amend his will against your interests. Also, a very strong motive." She paused, allowing the weight of these accusations to settle. "And then there is Thomas, the footman, with a past that, alas, suggests a previous inclination towards theft." She then began to weave in the physical clues, not as isolated facts, but as interconnected parts of a cunning scheme. The missing dancing cavalier miniature led us to believe this was a robbery that escalated. But what if it was not about the miniature itself, but what it implied? And what if the thief was not the murderer? Miss Marple then spoke of the hidden passage, the stiff lock on the study door, and the gardener's strange observation. The unusual smell, metallic and sweet, near the study window detected by Mr. Hopkins. This suggests a specific method, not a struggle. Something delivered from outside, perhaps through an open window or a cleverly disguised vent within that passage. She explained that such a scent could be consistent with certain slow-acting chemical agents, perhaps administered in gaseous form, designed to incapacitate or slowly poison, mimicking a heart attack. "And the clock," she continued, her eyes now resting on Mr. Davies. "The clock running fast by 15 minutes. A deliberate act to obscure the time of death, to distort alibis. Who would know Sir Alister's precise habits with his heirloom clock? Who would have the opportunity and the presence of mind to tamper with it?" A shiver ran through the room. Mr. Davies, usually so composed, shifted in his seat. "Then we have the missing key to the locked cabinet," Miss Marple pressed on. "Mr. Davies, you testified that Sir Alister put the key back on its hook after retrieving documents concerning his will, just hours before his death. Yet the key was gone. If it was a robbery, why take the key to a cabinet that had already been locked, unless the killer intended to return and access its contents later, or perhaps had already done so?" She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. It points to someone who knew the castle intimately, who had access, who was aware of Sir Alister's habits, and, crucially, who knew about the true contents of the cabinet and perhaps even the hidden passage. Someone who wanted not only Sir Alister dead, but also something from that cabinet, or to prevent a specific change in his will. Miss Marple's gaze, now piercing, settled on Mr. Davies. "You, Mr. Davies, were Sir Alister's secretary. You handled all his affairs. You knew his habits, his will, his aversions. You knew Reginald's debts and Eleanor's predicament. You knew about his plan to amend the will, potentially within days. And you, perhaps, had a very specific reason to stop that from happening, and to secure certain documents." Mr. Davies' face, usually so colorless, now flushed a mottled red. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "The dancing cavalier miniature," Miss Marple continued, her voice gaining a quiet force. "It was not stolen for its value, but as a deliberate distraction. A red herring, Inspector, to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. But the actual prize was not the miniature, was it, Mr. Davies?" Miss Marple looked directly at the secretary. "The actual prize was in the cabinet. And Sir Alistair, Mr. Davies, was not just about to disinherit Reginald and control Eleanor. He was also, I believe, about to expose you. Perhaps for embezzlement. Perhaps for some other dishonesty you had been conducting over many years, hidden within his complex accounts. The missing key was not for theft. It was to remove evidence, or perhaps to recover something you had hidden within the cabinet yourself, knowing Sir Alistair would soon find it. Mr. Davies gasped, a raw, choked sound. His carefully constructed facade crumbled. He looked like a man trapped, his eyes darting wildly. "The smell Mr. Hopkins detected?" Miss Marple concluded. "A slow-acting poison, administered through a device concealed in the hidden passage, triggered perhaps after you left, to ensure your alibi. The fast clock to confuse the timeline. The missing miniature, a perfect distraction for the police. All meticulously planned by a man who knew the castle, its secrets, and its master's habits better than anyone." Mr. Davies stood up, his chair clattering to the floor. His face was a mask of terror and rage. You have no proof." He stammered, his voice hoarse, but his eyes betrayed him. His composure was utterly shattered, revealing the desperate man beneath. Miss Marple had unveiled the truth, not with a flourish, but with the quiet, devastating logic of an unraveled quilt. Chapter 12. The Truth in the Twinkling Eye. The drawing room, once a setting for festive cheer, now pulsed with the raw shock of Miss Marple's revelation. Mr. Davies, stripped of his meticulous facade, stood trembling, a figure of pathetic fury and fear. Inspector Craddock, though initially incredulous, had followed Miss Marple's deductions with growing certainty. The pieces, once scattered and confusing, had clicked into place with an unnerving precision. "Proof, Mr. Davies?" Craddock's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "We'll find it now. The device in the passage, the chemical residue, the discrepancies in the accounts you managed for Sir Alistair. Your alibi, supported by the doctored clock, will now be scrutinized for every flaw. And the miniature, I suspect, will be found, a deliberately placed distraction." Faced with such overwhelming, if circumstantial, evidence and the calm, knowing gaze of Miss Marple, Mr. Davies finally broke. A choked sob escaped him, and he collapsed back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. "He was going to ruin me," he mumbled, his voice muffled, a confession slowly tumbling out. "He found out about the investments. The funds I diverted. He said he was going to expose me, destroy my life. The new will, it wasn't just about the family. It included an audit, a full audit of all his finances. I couldn't let that happen. Not after all these years." He admitted to discovering the old, rarely used hidden passage behind the tapestry, a secret he had stumbled upon years ago while researching the castle's history for Sir Alistair. He had carefully rigged a small, almost imperceptible vent from the passage into the study, knowing Sir Alistair's habit of keeping the study window slightly ajar even in winter. He had acquired a slow-acting, odorless poison from an obscure chemical catalog, one that mimicked cardiac arrest, and delivered it through the vent using a small, pressurized canister. The faint, metallic sweet smell was, in his panic, the residual aroma of the chemical. He had adjusted the grandfather clock just before leaving the study on Christmas Eve, knowing it would confuse the timeline. The dancing cavalier miniature, he had merely moved it from its display cabinet into a concealed recess within the hidden passage itself, ensuring it would be discovered only much later, if at all, further cementing the robbery theory. And the key to the cabinet? He had taken it from the hook after Sir Alistair's death, returning later via the hidden passage to remove incriminating ledgers and documents, placing them in a secure hidden compartment in his own room, a detail the police would now certainly uncover. The motive, as Miss Marple had intuited, was not just greed for what might be inherited, but desperate fear of exposure for past transgressions. Mr. Davies, the quiet, unassuming secretary, had, for years, been systematically siphoning funds hidden within the labyrinthine accounts of Sir Alistair's vast estate. Sir Alistair, with his particular idea of order, had finally begun to notice the subtle discrepancies, initiating the audit that would expose his trusted secretary. As Craddock's men moved to take Mr. Davies into custody, a hush fell over the room. Reginald and Eleanor, though still reeling from the shock, looked at each other with a new, shared understanding. Their uncle's death had been a tragedy, but the trial of suspicion had revealed the intricate, often dark, currents of human nature that Miss Marple had so calmly unpicked. Miss Marple watched the scene unfold, her eyes twinkling with a quiet wisdom. "You see, Inspector," she said softly to Craddock, "it's often the quiet ones, isn't it? The ones who seem so perfectly ordinary, they have the most to hide, like the mouse in the larder, silent and unnoticed until the cheese begins to disappear." The case of the trial in the Christmas Castle had come to a full and chilling resolution. The grand house, once filled with festive lights, had borne witness to a crime born of fear and desperation, cleverly orchestrated by a man who knew every secret corner and every daily habit. The truth, as always, had been hidden in plain sight, waiting for the keen eye that understood the complexities of the human heart and the subtle whispers of a quiet English